I know we've talked about the deadline as a whole in a couple weeks prior, but I want to take you to actually deadline day and kind of the craziness and hecticness that comes with that. Do you have any insights or behind the scenes on just how crazy, going up against that deadline, how many calls are you making, all the teams you're monitoring, players, whether you're a buyer or a seller? What is that day like?
Well, so I'll give you an example, personally, but also one that happened with the Orioles. It happened with my cousin when they were considering trading Zach Britton to the Astros. And, you guys might remember the year, but it was one of the years, obviously, they weren't in the postseason, but they were, getting close to trading Zach Britton, but they needed approval from ownership. And they were waiting that final day leading up to the trade deadline, and it ended up that they couldn't come to an agreement based on ownership there with the Orioles. And that's the hard part when you're a GM on both sides. You want to have everything buttoned up, including ownership approval, including the medicals that have been exchanged. If you can do that the night before, because there are a lot of things that can happen, and if something goes haywire leading up to that 5 o'clock deadline on the actual day, you want to have some time to maybe insert another player or two and all of those things that are behind that go with that, medicals and conversations with your scouts. So, you really don't want to have to make a deal last minute because you can make mistakes, and that's where you see, yes, there's a ton of calls going on there, but primarily it's not a last minute trade necessarily. It's the the exchange of medicals.
So it's that type of mistake you're talking about. It's
that type of mistake,
it's like
right.
The little thing like that of shoot, we're up against the clock here, and you rush something and something just gets you know what? This is it. This is what we're talking. It
happened to me way back when I traded one of our top prospects, Scott Kazmir, for Victor Zambrano. Our medical team didn't have the time to find some, a page of prior injury history. And right as soon as we got him, second, third start, he got injured. That's a major mistake. It's a major mistake organizationally, but the general manager is the one who's the one who ends up, taking on the blame on it. Even if the medical team didn't see or didn't find that page until later, well, that's too late. So you don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to be in that situation. And and I remember actually that was right when I was starting to pick up with baseball and starting. And man, I'm sorry you had to deal with that stress. That cannot be fun because then it's going to weigh on you. It solely is going to go on you because of you being the one in control, even though there's other things and other factors that are solved in it. All right, now for part two, Jim. So get that brain ready.
Yeah, so for part two, Jim, would you classify maybe the Britton Astros or the Kazmir? Would those be the craziest experiences you've been a part of or heard? Or are there any other crazy or craziest deadline experiences that you've had that maybe come to mind?
I think those are the ones when you kind of look at it leading up to the trade deadline that stand out. I mean, there's always, something. I did a small. I want to say it. I'm trying to remember if this was. I think this was a deadline deal that I did back when I was with the Orioles. It was hot. I think it might have been in August, but I think it was leading up to it. They needed a catcher. We traded Javi Lopez to them for just what we thought was a fourth outfield type. The name is going to escape me at the moment, but we needed to move Javi because we had Ramon Hernandez. He wasn't, we weren't going anywhere. We were trying to get a prospect back in return. We did it. We did this deal. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it was an August trade. So that one maybe doesn't even necessarily apply. But those are kind of the ones that there's been years where we just stood pat, and those are like the absolute worst. I talked about one recently where, remember old friend Armando Benitez. Any of you longtime Orioles?
Oh boy!
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
I
sugar.
had Armando as a Met. And I traded him the night after the All-Star game was over. He was an All-Star. I traded him to the Yankees. And that was before you had social media. And I leaked it through some Yankee fans who who said their worst nightmare was getting Benitez. And I said, well, your worst nightmares come true. I traded Benitez to you. And then they told their friends, and it leaked out. And then I had to tell Benitez. It was in the papers the next morning, and I hadn't even told him yet.
Oh, no.
And so I told him, and he was checking out of the hotel at the All-Star break, and that's when I told him. So there's deals like that stand out. But like right up to the deadline, there's not like that real sexy trade that I can recall.
So how did Armando take that?
He wasn't happy, right? He was going to set up Mariano Rivera, and then what happened was 2 weeks into it, as a setup guy, he could not handle that role. He was an adrenaline junkie, and then they traded him to Seattle for Jeff Nelson, who could handle the role. If you remember Nelly back in the day, he was one of the best setup guys. So the Yankees, it took them 2 weeks to figure out that trade wasn't going to work, and they flipped them to the Mariners.
See, those are the insights there that we just don't know here, Jim, and I love it. Now we got to ask. Rocco and I he gave me that look here. You just mentioned, out of curiosity, for that Britton deal, who were you guys trying to get from Houston at that time? Do you remember?
Well, so that deal from I think that a young Valdez was in that deal, but I have to go back and look at that to see for sure. Yeah, the names from that, you would go, oh my Lord. There was a couple of them, and I swear, I'm pretty sure is Valdez. I'm going to have to go back and look at my notes and text you later if that was.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure Valdez was in the organization at the time, but I think he was like in the minors. Can you imagine if Valdez right now was pitching for the O's?
Oh, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. Zach's heart just skipped a beat there, but that's the part there that we're talking about, though, Jim, is prospects that you don't know what they could turn out to be.
Right.
And then that could be your worst fear type of thing. Like, that's exactly what can happen. I know in some cases, this is another one, guys, that's recent. And I know he's had some, ups and downs, at least the suspension, but James Shields, right? James Shields.
Yeah.
The double S. Yeah. Sorry. James Shields got traded. And the player in that deal was Fernando Tatis Jr. And then he turned out to be the player that he is. Yes, he had the suspension, but he's a talented player, one of the best hitters in the game. So there it just goes to show, right, Jim? You never fully know until it happens. But man, now Orioles fans are going to think, what if? What if?
That was the second time Shields was traded, by the way. He was in KC.
Yep.
Or no, he's in Chicago. But he had started in Tampa. And then I think he went to Kansas City. Anyway, it's a while ago. But you're right. What? Wow, Tatis Jr. Can you imagine? But they had to wait, I think, 2 or 3 years before he got to the big leagues. But Tatis is considered one of the best players in the sport.
Exactly, and that's the part of it, the waiting game. And that's the thing with the prospects. You have an idea, but you never know. They're like, I tell people this, Jim, they're lottery tickets. You think that one of them can hit and they are going to be unbelievable players, but you just don't know which one's fully going to pan out. You can have a better idea, but if you have multiple of those lottery tickets, you think you're going to hit on a few more of those players. Right. So
here's one more, Ryan.
Okay.
Remember when the Orioles traded? The year they beat the Tigers in the first round, he started Game 4 for them. They got him from the Astros. Right-handed pitcher.
Feldman?
No, it
was it not Ham? No,
Norris.
Bud Norris.
Bud Norris. You guys remember who they traded for him, right?
Josh Hader.
Josh Hader.
Yeah.
Right. So you go and then Josh Hader didn't pitch for the Astros.
Nope.
Because then they traded him to Milwaukee a couple years later. But that's and Bud was a number 4 starter back then. He was pitching better than that. But that's the risk that you have. And that quite honestly is the stress part of that job. Like, oh man, I know I'm giving up a good player here. I don't know how good he's going to be. Josh Hader turned out to be now they thought he'd be a starter and he ended up being a dominating closer, but that's the risk that you have in any trade deadline. But you're willing to do that if Bud Norris, even though he's number 4 starter, he helped you get to the ALCS. You wouldn't trade that at the end of the day. Obviously you hope to get to the World Series, but getting the ALCS, that's the farthest they've been since the end of the late 90s, right? And I think that at the end my cousin got criticized for that deal, but I don't know if they get to the ALCS if they didn't even trade for Bud that year.
That's the dilemma. That's the dilemma here. Do we want to see success for a team that's desperate and the ultimate goal, not desperate, but the ultimate goal is to win the World Series with the opportunity where the flip of a coin, how great is this player going to turn out to be? And again, that's why, well, Jim, I can't afford to be in those positions with my hairline because it will fall out way quicker than I need it to